It is. Welcome in, everyone, to this episode of the Bat Flip Podcast. My name is Damien here with Matt and David. And today we're going to be bringing you our 2024 MLB trade deadline superlatives. We're going to give you our best overall deadline, worst overall deadline, best single trade, worst single trade, and what our favorite and least favorite moves of the deadline was. But before we get into that, David, how are you doing on this week after the trade deadline?
Oh, it's good, It's about ready to try to go on vacation here before we get started up with school and stuff. So I'm excited about that. But for now, team's playing a little bit better after the trade deadline. I don't know if that's directly correlated to the moves or not. So we'll see if the playoffs get shaken up. I'm definitely excited to kind of go over this with a week to think it over. You heard our reactions last week live. I thought you know we can think about it here after a week and kind of go over what we're thinking about some of these moves. But I think my opinion has shifted on a few things, and I'm looking forward to getting into it. So, Matt, how are you doing this fine week?
I'm doing pretty good. Just been hanging out basically pretty much. Been watching a lot of the Olympics. It's been entertaining. Um, so watching some baseball, although my team makes me want to scratch my eyes out sometimes. But losing 2 games in a row to the Marlins is not good. But yeah, everything's been pretty good for me. How about you, Damien?
I've been fine. My team's been on a little skid themselves. They went and lost to the Oakland A's on Friday night, which you never want to do. But they were able to bounce back with a couple. And I think a good thing to also mention here is that we've got good news, but we had a scary situation this week with Freddie Freeman and his son last Friday. Um, like basically had full body paralysis, and he missed a good chunk of a week with the team. He's back today. Sounds like everything is on the upward trajectory. So hopefully everything keeps going that way. But that was a scary situation as a fan of baseball, and just knowing the kind of person I know Matt and I can both attest to the person Freddie is as a player and in the league, and to see somebody go through something like that, um, it's pretty scary. So glad that Max is doing well and on the upswing for sure.
Yeah, for
But
sure. That's a scary situation. I'm glad that he's doing better.
yeah. So let's go ahead and just start with what our best overall trade deadline is. So this is from basically a best overall deadline as a team perspective. Um, Not necessarily what we think is our favorite, just overall who we think did the best at the deadline for their needs. And this could be winners or sellers or buyers, so it's either way. So, Matt, why don't you go ahead and start us off with who the best overall deadline was in your eyes?
Yeah, I will. I thought the best deadline for me, there was a lot of them that were really good. But my favorite one from and it's a buyer would be the Seattle Mariners. I really liked the pickups they made. I thought that the Randy Arozarena trade, they kind of got ahead of the market with that one, and they're kind of getting a good buy low on him. And he's really started to come around the last couple months. He had a horrible start to the season, but part of it was BABIP driven, and they gave up a pretty good prospect. I believe Hopkins was the better prospect in that deal, but I mean, you're getting a guy who has all-star type potential, and you really didn't give up like a top 100 type guy for him. So I really liked that deal. And then they moved on with getting a really good reliever in Yimi Garcia for Jonathan Clase, who's a guy that I think has a lot of potential, but I haven't been too impressed by his minor league numbers. Recently he had a 110 WRC plus at AAA. He's got super high end speed, but I think that there's some concern about his hit tool. He strikes out an absolute ton. So without having like elite power or anything, he's got fine power, but it's not like good enough. It's not good enough to strike out 30% of the time. So he's really more of a speed game. And I think that the move for I think that move was really good. Getting Yimi Garcia, who's been an elite reliever this year, and then also the last guy I thought getting Justin Turner was a good move. The Mariners really just needed bats, and with the struggles that Ty France had this year, and then the DFA and trade, they really needed to replace the production that they had gotten from him over the last couple of years. So getting Justin Turner was a good pickup for them, and he's already had a pretty good impact on that team since he's been there, and he's also like a really good clubhouse guy for a team that's got pretty good amount of young players and players that are inexperienced in postseason type atmospheres. Guys like Julio Rodriguez and a lot of their pitchers really have very little postseason experience. JP Crawford has very little. I mean, they played in that one. I guess it was they did make it to they did win the wild card series against the Blue Jays a couple years ago, but they've only played in one postseason. So Justin Turner is one of those seasoned veterans that I really like. So, I mean, I thought they hit their needs. They really didn't need any starting pitching. They needed a bullpen arm, and they just needed to improve their offense. And I think they really did that. So, good on the Mariners for going out and buying. And I also, the thing that kind of set them over the top was I really didn't think they gave up too much considering what they got back. I thought it was a pretty good series of moves. So I liked the Mariners as my number one.
David, what do you who do you think?
Yeah, so considering it on a team-wide basis, I thought it has to be a buyer here. The teams that are setting themselves up for postseason success specifically, and I'm going with the Orioles. Now, I don't think I love every individual move the Orioles made. I think we're definitely going to criticize a couple of the Orioles moves here down the stretch, but the Orioles did everything in my mind right when it comes to buying, in that they anchored their starting rotation utilizing young prospects that are far away. They or somewhat superlative prospects that they're not going to use. They anchored their bullpen, albeit with maybe a bit of a questionable reliever, but still someone that they can trust who has postseason experience, like Matt was talking about. And they added right-handed bats to a extremely left-handed lineup. I just think that Orioles did everything right here. They didn't touch any of their top premium prospects. I think Connor Norby's maybe a second tier prospect. So is Jackson Baumeister. But this was the number one system in baseball. They needed to go out and make some moves, because not only was this group is it chock full of prospects and kind of almost too full of MLB ready prospects, but it's a group that's definitely ready for a postseason run, a deep postseason run, and they had experienced a lot of injuries in the starting rotation. So adding two starting pitchers in Zach Eflin and Trevor Rogers is a good move. That's huge for this group. I think Zach Eflin might be. We'll talk about it. I think he might be one of the best players moved at this deadline. And I think when he gets into this postseason mix with Baltimore, it's very possible that he starts maybe game 2 of the Orioles playoffs, maybe game 3. So big. This is a big implication game, and I think Zach Eflin is definitely the best starting pitcher that moved that could have started a game 3. It's him or Jack Flaherty. And we'll talk about Jack Flaherty in a little bit, but like this, I love this move for the Orioles, and obviously Eloy Jimenez kind of for free, effectively, just as long as you pay his contract. That's an awesome move. They have a lot of payroll flexibility because all their players are pre-arb. So this Orioles team has gotten a lot better. They're tied with the Yankees right now for this very competitive AL East. I genuinely love what they did at this deadline. Think they're going to make a push for the postseason, and then a big push in the postseason to go out and win a World Series with this core.
Yeah, I think the Orioles had a pretty good deadline as well. So for mine, I went on the kind of opposite end of the spectrum than you guys. You guys both went buyers. I went with a seller here, and I think a seller who I think we quickly saw that this was going to be a seller's market, and we had a few of those teams that we expected, like, hey, these guys should be ones to sell. A couple of them didn't. The one team that went full sell was the Miami Marlins, and I love pretty much almost every move that they made here. They kickstarted it off by trading AJ Puck to the D-backs, getting Davison De Los Santos and Andrew Pintar back. I think De Los Santos is hitting for insane power. He should be up pretty soon for them. Playing every day. Pintar is a nice outfield prospect that they can get there. Um, and then you see later on, as the deadline went, they did the Tanner Scott trade, which we saw to the San Diego Padres, and I feel like they got, it was Tanner Scott and Brian Hoeing. They got a good haul back in that trade as well. With trying to find it on here, Robbie Snelling, Adam Azur, Graham Pauley, and Jay Beschers. I really like Robbie Snelling. I think he could have a future's middle rotation guy. They Brian De La Cruz trading him to the Pirates for Jung Seok Shim, who I'm really really high on. He's super young, but he has the stuff to be a top level pitcher. One time, getting off of a Huskar Brazoban too. Relievers are fickle. You never know when they're going to be good or bad. They got a solid prospect for them as well. I think for everything that the Marlins, and that's including the Jazz trade, which we've talked about in depth here, getting 3 prospects: a catcher, Augustin Ramirez. Um, where's the other ones? I lost it on here. Infield Jared Serna and infield Abraham Ramirez. We've talked about the Marlins at these deadlines for the past couple years. If they were going to make these big sell-off trades, they never did it. I think Peter Bendix in his first year really, really made an impact to help the future of this team. And it's one that the sell can even continue going into the offseason. If you get guys like Jesus Luzardo healthy, you'll get Sandy Alcantara coming back. Like, you have Jake Berger, you have Jesus Sanchez, who people were also interested in. Like, they still have some pieces that they could sell if they wanted to, but those guys can also continue to be pieces that you build around with a very good deadline here too, getting a lot of prospects. And I think they did a really, really good job given the fact of what the market was like and finding out that it was a seller's market. They got a lot of high level talent, I believe, back in return. So let's transition now. We're talking about best overall deadline. Now let's go to what our worst overall deadline is, and we'll go ahead and start with David on this one.
Yeah, mine is going to be kind of short because the team that I picked only made one move. It's Minnesota Twins. What are they doing? That's my question. There is a lot of these teams chose a lane, right? And I think that's an important facet of winning or losing at the deadline is you have to have picked the lane. Now, there's going to be teams that didn't make good moves with their lane, but at least they chose a direction. The Twins just idled. And this is a team not guaranteed to make the playoffs, but with a well above 500 record, with superstar Carlos Correa on year 2 of a 6-year deal, like that deal is not going to continue, right? They're getting an all-time season from Royce Lewis despite injuries, and you've got to shore up the lineup around those guys because you've got to have some contingencies. What if Lewis or Buxton gets hurt down the stretch and you miss the playoffs? You could have gone out there and grabbed a bat at the deadline, but they didn't do it. It's a disappointing deadline for the Minnesota Twins. I think they needed to keep pace with the Royals and the Guardians. Guardians went out and got Lane Thomas. Royals did a number of trades, went out and got Lucas Urseg among other guys. So I just think this deadline, you had to be a little more active if you were the Twins in order to stay in this race. And down the stretch, I mean, I'd look for the Royals to overtake the Twins and the Twins maybe to fall out of the wild card race.
Yeah, I like that pick, David. I was between 2 different teams for this one. Well, actually 3. The 3 teams were the White Sox, the Padres, and the Giants. And I picked the White Sox here. I could have gone either way with them or the Padres, really, but at least the Padres added something that will help them, even though I thought it was a series of pretty terrible trades. But the White Sox, they were sellers, of course, as we knew they were going to be. But I didn't really think they got back what I didn't think they did a very good job. I mean, best move biggest player, the best player they moved was Eric Fetty, who they got a couple of good prospects for, but I mean, when you consider like what other starting pitchers Fetty's been really good this year, and what you consider what other starting pitchers got, and especially rentals who don't have that second year of control that's really cheap like Fetty does. I just didn't think they got all that much for him. And then, you have the Paul DeJong trade. I mean, that was fine. That was a good offseason pickup because they were able to flip him for something. And They traded a couple of other, Kopech was in that other trade too. Eloy, they traded Eloy to the Orioles. I mean, they didn't get anything back for him. It just cleared payroll space, which, I mean, what are they going to, what for? I mean, they're not going to use that payroll space. I mean,
Nope.
they're a rebuilding team. Like they could have, you know, I don't really fully understand that one. They could have paid his salary down and used that contract to buy a prospect, but they didn't. Um, and then you have the two guys they didn't move, which they're under team control, but I mean, the White Sox are not going to be good for at least 3 or 4 years. And, you know, I understand the Garrett Crochet. Why not move him? Because of the controversy with him and his agent coming out and saying that he will not pitch in the postseason without an extension. And there's already a lot of risk with him with the injuries that he's had. And he hasn't ever pitched a full workload over a season. And we're halfway through this season. He's already like hit his career high for innings pitched and stuff. So, there's a lot of question marks about him, and I understand why they didn't want to. Because I mean, this guy is a potential ace, and he's pitched like an ace all year this year. And you don't want to sell an ace to somebody who goes on to pitch 200 innings for the next 3 years and is incredible, and you get a little bit of a lighter return for him. So I get not trading him, but what's with Luis Robert? I mean, he's had a great year last year. He's having a good year this year. He's a little bit of an injury risk, but he's been pretty healthy most of this year. So, and it's not like he's going to be on your next big team. And he's also that type of player that, with his approach at the plate and stuff, and the position, the defensive position he plays being one that's a lot of his value is being a really good center fielder. And with him aging and with the injuries he's had, slowing down and stuff. I mean, this is a time to sell Luis Robert for them. And they could have gotten a lot at this deadline for those two guys, and they just didn't do it. And it's why the White Sox are the White Sox. But I just didn't really like their deadline at all.
Yeah, I can't agree more. Like if you didn't pick the White Sox for your least favorite deadline, I would have picked it, or your worst overall deadline, because for everything you lined out, like they absolutely should have traded Crochet and Robert right now. And it's not just that they didn't trade them, it's that they didn't trade them while the prices were extremely high, which we saw was a seller's market, but that then they also paired that with trading uh, Fetty, Kopech, and Tommy Pham, and just getting back Miguel Vargas basically, and two lower level prospects, which I think Miguel Vargas still has a lot of potential to be a solid bat in the league. Like he was injured last year, really struggled coming back, and then he was in the minor leagues this year and tore it up, and he never got consistent playing time in LA this year. I think if once they settle down and finally realize he's not a left fielder and let him play a second or a third base where he most likely fits better defensively and give him some runway, I think he'll be just fine there. But it's the fact of you didn't get much else, right? And it's also weird that that trade was originally as a Eric Fetty for Tommy Pham, or not Tommy Pham, Eric Fetty for Tommy Edman straight up, and then it morphed into the trade we saw, which was them also giving up Kopech, basically Edman and Tommy Pham, and just getting Miguel Vargas and two lower level prospects. So I agree. That's a terrible, terrible deadline. But what else do we expect from Jerry Reinsdorf? Like,
Yeah.
we really don't expect anything.
I do want to push slightly back. I do think we're overselling the Luis Robert 2024 season a little bit. He's been below average by WRC plus. And that coupled with the fact that he is once again not going to hit 100 games played in a season, that's I think all but one season of his entire career, barring last year, of him not hitting 100 games played. I don't know what GM is giving up top end talent for Luis Robert. The White Sox hanging on to him, in my mind, is a good thing, because if he plays well down the stretch, you can float that he's still got the couple years of control and he was healthy down the stretch. So the concerns are over. But I would say the market for Luis Robert is much suppressed from what they're hoping to get, especially coming off of a guy in 2023 who was very, very good. They were not going to get the value for 2023 Robert, and they have a lot more time still to trade him off. I think the hope might be that a team overpays in the offseason, but even better, they hope he has a really good first half, very healthy first half, and they trade him midseason next year. That would, I think, be my thought process for them.
There was a lot of teams willing to give the White Sox a haul for Luis Robert that were they were not even entertained for,
Yeah.
and it's for 3.5 years. Like there were teams willing to give up a good bit, and it was like the White Sox didn't even try and talk Luis Robert. So that's where I feel like it was a
Yeah.
letdown. Is like they didn't even try and engage with him to see, and teams were willing to trade a lot. Um, so my least favorite deadline or worst overall deadline, I should say, is the Angels. They are another one of those teams, just like Jerry Reinsdorf. Artie Moreno, he makes spur moment decisions. He very much doesn't know the direction he wants to go one day to the next day. And they had pieces like Luis Rengifo, they had Tyler Anderson, you had Luis Garcia, you had Hunter Strickland, you had Kevin Pillar. You had pieces that maybe these guys weren't going to get you a ton. They did well in the Carlos Estevez trade, I will say for sure. Um, but basically, the only two trades were Estevez and then trading Luis Garcia for like four super low level prospects that probably don't have any impact there. They didn't capitalize on Luis Rengifo having like a great season. He would have had a good market, I assume. Not trading Tyler Anderson after he had a really good season and we saw the pitching strive market. And he's on a contract that has an extra year on it. That's really not terrible if you look at the marketplace for what pitching's been going for the past couple years. Not trading Kevin Pillar, who's on a 1-year deal, and literally saying, hey, I'm going to retire at the end of the year. Like, not even giving him an opportunity to go to a contender for anything, even. Like, I feel really, really let down in this team because they feel like they should have been able to get decent value for guys here and really commit to what this team needs for the future. And it just, once again, feels like Artie Moreno feels like they're not that far away from competing, and it's just really, really head scratching because I think everyone else in the game, I think even his own general manager knows, like, hey, we're pretty far off from competing. We're not like one or two guys away. We really need to reshape what this is, and that's on top of having one of the worst farm systems in the game as well already. So
It's worth noting that Christian Moore has already been promoted to Double A,
Oh
yeah,
my
first round
God.
pick.
yeah, and he's homered like twice too.
Yeah,
Like
he looks good. He'll be an Angel before September ends, that's for sure.
yeah, like it's been
Which is
crazy.
dumb. They should not be starting
Yeah,
clocks
they
like that.
shouldn't
But
be
anyway,
moving him. They shouldn't be moving him to the big leagues, but having him in Double A makes a lot of sense since he was this like polished hitter out of college already.
Yeah,
So
some
I
advanced
I,
bat.
I like that. I don't like him going to the big leagues before September though.
Yeah, but Artie Moreno will think that's the
Oh,
piece
they'll
they
do
need.
it. I mean, they did. They've done it.
So,
They've got a
literally the
pattern.
last two drafts they've done it.
yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so let's jump over to talking about our best single trade. So just the one trade that we feel like was the most impactful trade here at the deadline.
Yeah. My best single trade. There were a lot of trades at this deadline that I thought were really lopsided in one direction or another, but I'm going to pick one that I thought was a pretty good win-win, and that's going to be the trade for Jack Flaherty going to the Dodgers for Tyron Lorenzo and Trey Sweeney. I really like this deal for both teams. The Dodgers really needed a pitcher at this deadline. They've got a lot of injuries. They've had injuries to Kershaw. They've had injuries to obviously Otani not pitching. Yamamoto's been hurt some. Glass now has been healthy, but he's a ticking time bomb most years. So there's a lot of and this is an all in year for the Dodgers. I mean, they've they they've got to do what it takes to put themselves in the best position possible to win the World Series this year. And Jack Flaherty was probably the best pitcher moved at the deadline. I mean, he's very good. He's having a great season. He's got a 2.80 ERA and a 3.02 FIP. His xFIP is 2.60. So he's getting tons of swing and miss. He's not walking anybody, which has been a huge issue for him the last few years. He's been awesome in 2024, and then so with him being a rental and the way that this market was, obviously he was going to get some form of a king's ransom, even though he's only a rental. So, and he did, but it was guys that the Dodgers thought were expendable because they're fully blocked at the big league level, and that so you look at Tyron Lorenzo he's a catching prospect who might end up having to move out for the catcher, but regardless, he can't play. He can't catch for the Dodgers because Will Smith. He can't play first if he has to move there because of Freddie Freeman, and he can't play. He can't DH because of Otani. So this guy's going to have. I mean, he is in high A, so we're talking a couple years down the line. But all those guys are locked up long term. So moving him was good, and then I liked it for the Tigers because they got a guy who has like 70 grade raw power and is a switch hitting catcher. I mean that there's not many of those guys walking around, and it's a swing it upside there. But he hadn't had a great year in the minors, but I really liked that move and the dart throw there for a rental, and then Trey Sweeney was a really nice throw in. He's now the number 8 prospect in the Tiger system. He's had some struggles this year in the Dodgers system, but in the past, I mean, he's been a above average bat in the minors, and he plays a little bit of a below average shortstop, but he's kind of a utility guy, and the Dodgers have tons of utility guys. So I mean, I thought both of these guys were kind of blocked in LA, so they were kind of expendable, and LA moved them and got a elite pitcher for them or a guy who's been elite this year, and the Tigers took advantage of the market and got a really good return for a rental pitcher. So I was really high on that trade. I thought both sides did really well.
Yeah, it's a good one for sure. The obvious buy where the top prospect that got moved is involved at the deadline there. It's a good trade, I think, and it's good to see. The Dodgers are obviously a team that needed starting pitching, so it's good that they're still buying and the Tigers are able to take advantage, even though the Tigers maybe didn't sell everything they could have there. They didn't unleash anything that wasn't tied down, but um, they're still set up. They're still right around 500. I think that's a really good, solid deadline move for the Detroit Tigers. My favorite trade, or I guess the best trade that I thought that I thought occurred. I think Lucas Erceg moving to the Royals from the Oakland A's is the best like value move. 3 prospects went from Kansas City to Oakland. They're all pretty, maybe not irrelevant, but lower level guys, flyers really for Oakland. And Kansas City picks up a setup man at worst, closer at best, who is putting together just like really good whiff numbers constantly, right? His strikeout rate's been 27% each of the last 2 seasons with Oakland. He's a guy who got some left on base bad luck last year, and I think it kind of suppressed his trade value during the offseason. But in terms of like under the radar relief pitching gems, Lucas Erceg might be the best relief pitcher moved to this deadline, and he might have gone for like the 3rd lowest price of any of those relief pitchers. Like it was a heist, I think, for Kansas City, and Oakland ultimately I think sells a little bit low on Erceg, but this is a guy who throws 99 with a bunch of funk in his delivery, and he is not walking people as much this year with a lot of swing and miss to his game. Like, this is a dominant back end reliever. Oakland goes ahead, gives up one of their dominant back end relievers, keeps the other one, which in and of itself is a win for me. So, Mason Miller sticking with Oakland, that's a win for Oakland. They didn't just up and trade whoever. But moving on from Erceg, sending him to where he'll now get some run in the playoffs, probably with Kansas City, that's a good move. That's why it's my favorite trade. I think Erceg, if the Kansas City gets to the playoffs, which not a guarantee, but they certainly bought at this deadline, so they're going for it. Erceg's going to be a big reason why they win games in October.
Yeah, I think the Erceg trade it's going to be looked at as one of the most like interesting trades of the deadline, just because of the amount of control that Erceg still has, and his stuff is nasty. But it wasn't going to do anything in Oakland. Like I said, with the Mets trade, relievers are fickle. If you can get good value at one point for him, you almost have to do it immediately. And I think he's immediately stepped into the back end of that bullpen, him and Hunter Harvey, and I think they've pitched really well in their 2 or 3 games together already too. So I really do like the Erceg trade as well. My favorite or best single trade of the deadline, I think, is Randy Arozarena going to the Seattle Mariners. If there was just somebody who kind of fit what the Mariners needed at the time, it was Randy Arozarena. He has 2.5 years of control as well. And if you look at what he started the season off slow. He was starting to heat up a little bit with Tampa Bay. If you look at just this past week, what he's been able to do so far with Seattle's 8 games, he has a 158 WRC plus. He's hitting like 290. Has a 405 on base percentage. Like, of course, it's extremely small sample size, but he's been the shot in the arm that Seattle team has needed. They went head to head with the Phillies this weekend in Seattle. I think they took 2 of 3, if I'm not mistaken.
Two or three, yeah.
Yeah, they took 2 of 3 from the NL leading Philadelphia Phillies right now. So the Mariners did other things within the deadline, like Matt talked about there. But I think Randy, with the amount of control he has left, and the package they gave up, which at the time I think we all thought it was a little light. A lot of stuff that I've been reading, a lot of people like Brody Hopkins, like a lot. Seems like he could be a high level pitcher one day for the Rays. And that player to be named later, which we don't know who it is yet, it's not going to be a slouch player either. So I think overall it fits both teams. Like, this is typically the time, the Rays move off these guys, 2.5 years of control left. They can get good value, and going to the Seattle Mariners, who needed a shot in the arm. They needed somebody who brings energy like Randy does, who's a consistent playoff performer, who's, in clutch situations is really good. And that's everything the Mariners needed. And the Rays got back a solid return as well. So I think that's the best overall single trade in my eyes here at the deadline. So we've talked about best trades. So let's jump over to our worst single trades of it. And I'll start this one off. And I think the worst single trade for me this deadline was Jason Adam to the San Diego Padres. Not only did the Padres do more in the back end of that bullpen, getting Tanner Scott, getting Brian Hoeing, already have Jeremiah Estrada and Ranger Suarez not Ranger Suarez, Robert Suarez.
That's
there's a Suarez in there. And then also having Yuki Matsui and Adrian Morejon. The last thing I feel like they needed was another bullpen arm, with Jason Adam there. And not just another bullpen arm, but trading him for the package they did, giving up where'd he go?
Dylan Lesko, among
Dylan
others.
Lesko, outfielder Homer Bush, and infielder JD Gonzalez. I think Dylan Lesko is the real prize here. He's a guy who I've been super high on for a long time. High school prep arm, came out this year, has been dealing with Tommy John. He's dealt with some walk concerns. His strikeout to walk ratio doesn't look great. But this is the type of guy who is insane stuff, and the Rays are able to mold that. And I would not be surprised if we're talking about him being one of the best pitchers in the league in 5 years, 6 years, and trading all of that for another relief pitcher who's just going to be there. He's like 32 as well. I think that's by far the worst trade of the deadline. But it's AJ Preller doing AJ Preller things. So I just can't say how much I hate that trade from the Padres perspective, but I love it from a Dodgers fan's perspective.
Jason Adam pitched with the Cubs a few years ago. I could not stand him. And I think I said as much last week when we talked about this trade. I don't like watching him pitch. He pitches like he's very, very wild, often doesn't have it. Sometimes he does, and sometimes he's nasty. But the trade-off is that you have a very volatile reliever, and then you are paying a ransom price to acquire said volatile reliever. That's not a good move, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't want it to be like that I'm making Jason Adam be a bad player. I think he's a fine reliever. Like, I think he's fine. He's nothing great. He's not special. He's not terrible. But it's the fact that, like, you gave up a whole lot to get him, and the fact that you didn't need another bullpen arm at the time to give up all of that. Like,
well, that was pre-Tanner Scott, wasn't it? Because Tanner Scott went right to the deadline.
It was pre-Tanner Scott, but, like, still, if you were working on a Scott and a Hoeing trade, like, maybe you use those assets and go get a pitcher, like a starting pitcher. Like, you could have easily been in the market for a starting pitcher with that cost and still sent the amount of prospects you sent for Tanner Scott and Brian Hoeing, and I believe your team's a whole lot better. Because, like, the only starting pitcher they got is Martin Perez. Like, that's not great.
They're also starting David Peralta in the outfield right now. That's
waiting for Tatis to get back, but still.
Yeah, they could have used another player in that org, especially in the outfield. But yeah, Jason Adam, I guess.
Anyways, yeah. So David, what do you got for your worst single trade of the deadline?
All right, I'll be a homer, but I did react somewhat to this live-ish last week when we were kind of on our live stream there, and Mark Leiter Jr. for Jack Neely, and I'm gonna get the name wrong. I think it's Stows.
Yeah.
Um, Brian Stows is what I want to say it is. Cowles, close. Ben Cowles. Cowles is out for the year. Um, injured. And Neely is a pure relief prospect. He's like 6'8", and throws like 93 to 95. And he is like a sweeper, like a metric, high spin sweeper. And so that's why I'm sure the Cubs models popped on him. A guy who they're kind of expecting to get more cut ride on the fastball and stuff like that. Like I like the trade for a Jack Neely move. I think in a vacuum, that's fine, right? A reliever for Jack Neely. The problem was the Cubs have two relievers whose contracts are either expiring or on like a Neris is on an option, so but his next year cost is like 9 million again. It's fairly affordable, and Neris has been good recently. He had the stretch there where he was nearly unpitchable, but the Cubs had other relievers, right? And then every other move the Cubs made was a nearby, like a buy type trade, where they were playing the long game, right? They were trying to get better for 2025 or maintain. Mark Leiter Jr. was under control for 2025. Like trading him away does not make you better for next year. It now means you have to go out and probably spend money on the bullpen next year, or they're hoping, I guess, Jack Neely steps in, but like he's never even pitched in the major leagues. So it's like Mark Leiter Jr. has been a lockdown reliever for a year and a half, and to get a package of a reliever prospect that you can maybe replace Mark Leiter with, and hope he's as good as Mark Leiter, and an injured double A, bad in double A from college a few years back that is hitting well, but like is not doesn't appear to be like a major league starter. Cowles looks like a bench guy at the major league level right now. And I look at the right. We just talked about Jason Adam, and we're just talking about Lucas Urseg. Urseg's reliever prospects or prospects were at least like very young lottery ticket type prospects that can definitely explode in the right system. Now I don't know that system's Oakland, but I don't believe in any explosion happening here. This is Mark Leiter Jr. has been one like an equally dominant reliever to Jason Adam over the last 3 years. He's been very, very good, and to have him receive this package in compensation versus the Jason Adam package, it's the opposite end of the spectrum. It's very much, I would say, a misplay by a team that is hoping to contend in 2025. They traded away what it could be their best reliever in 2025 for peanuts. That's my I can't that's my least favorite move. It's just not a good move, and I think maybe they're a little worried about his last injury, which was a forearm strain. But he came out and he hasn't allowed a hit since. So I'm not a fan of this move. I would have much preferred to keep Mark Leiter around.
Hey, why would you want to keep your good relievers around when you could just go sign another Hector Neris in the offseason?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the
Or
one.
just re-sign Drew Smiley.
Yeah, there you go.
Drew Smiley's been very good, and I don't understand why he's still on the team and Mark Leiter is off the team. Okay, I'm done.
So my worst trade, I'm actually going to go with one that the Marlins and Orioles made, who David and Damian both picked as their favorite deadlines. But I hated the Trevor Rogers for Connor Norby and Kyle Stowers trade. I mean, the Trevor Rogers is not a good pitcher in 2024. He had his breakout year in 2021 where he had an excellent season. I believe did he win Rookie of the Year or
I
did he
don't think
finish?
he won it. I think he
No,
got
I
close.
don't
Yeah,
think he did, but yeah, he was close.
he was close. He was a candidate for Rookie of the Year. Had a 2.64 ERA in 133 innings, but since then he's dealt with a lot of injuries and he has just fallen off. And in 2024, he has been absolutely terrible. He has he's not striking anybody out. He's walking a ton of guys, giving up homers. His ground ball rate's way down. His velocity's down over 1 miles per hour, which when he was a really good starter in 2021, his fastball velocity was in the mid 90s at 94.6 miles per hour. This year it's 92.2 miles per hour. His slider's falling off. His stuff's not good after just the injuries, and he was also a guy that there was some rumors about the sticky stuff, and some signs that might have been a factor with him as well. Um, but I mean, he's got a 4.76 ERA, and it's not like this is some durable workhorse guy either. I mean, he's pitched 18 innings last year. He has been healthy this year, but he's about to hit his career high in innings. So I just don't think that's a good fit at all for the Orioles rotation. I know the Orioles needed a starting pitcher, but I mean there were other guys moved. Pretty much anybody else moved, I thought would have been a better option for them. And maybe they see something in Rogers that they can fix. But also, I want to commend the Marlins for getting the value of return that they got in this trade. But I think the prospects they've got back are pretty bad fits for what they need to do. I think the Marlins are in a similar situation to the White Sox or the, uh, where they just need to they need to just totally rebuild everything. The structure's not good. The farm system's horrible. And you know, Connor Norby is a kind of low upside, high floor type guy who's probably going to be a pretty good big leaguer, but not like there's not a lot of upside there. He doesn't really have a good defensive position. He strikes out a lot. He does have some pretty good power, and he's performed really well in the minors, but there's a lot of question marks with Connor Norby's game in general. Um, and I mean, I thought that obviously getting that return value wise was really good for Trevor Rogers. I mean, Connor Norby on some sites has been a top prospect in the top 100, although I think he's fallen off a little bit this year, but um, you know, I just didn't a guy that's big league ready as well. And I mean, you're going into a rebuild. By the time you get out of this rebuild in 4 years, he's only going to have a year or two of control left. And it's not like he's some high upside guy that you want to build your franchise around. So I would have rather preferred them take a dart throw that's like a low A, hard thrower or something. But if the Orioles were going to overpay, and then Kyle Stowers, I mean, it's kind of a similar situation. He's more of a throw in. He's been really bad at the big league level. He's been pretty okay in the minors, but he strikes out a ton. If you get a platoon bat out of him to flip in a couple years, that would be good. But I just thought that I thought the return was good value, but it was a bad fit. And then Rogers is, I mean, I don't really understand why the Orioles went out and got him. So
Yeah, I think for me, the Orioles getting him is it's just the controllable pitcher, and they might see something that they can fix,
yeah,
and make him a solid pitcher. I mean, that's pretty much it. And they didn't need Norby or Stowers, and then it's Peter Bendix who's coming from the Rays. They do this. They get guys who you might not think is the best fit, and then they just find a way to make them productive big leaguers. Then they can flip them down the road or whatever. But I wanted to go back to real quick. Trevor Rogers finished second in Rookie of the Year voting to Jonathan India. Um, the rest of the top six there were Dylan Carlson, Patrick Wisdom, Ian Anderson, and then Frank Schwindel.
Oh baby.
So there's that. But okay, so let's jump over to our favorite or our favorite deadline move. So this is gonna be different. We did our best deadline move of what we thought was overall. Now this is just gonna be our favorite. It doesn't have to be anything that's gonna be super impactful. Just what we think is gonna be our favorite personally. So, Matt, why don't you go ahead and start with your favorite deadline move?
so my favorite deadline move, actually, this move is just so intriguing to me on both ends, and it's the Rays and Cubs trade with uh, Isaac Paredes going to Chicago and Christopher Morel and prospects going to Tampa. I thought this was a super intriguing trade. Isaac Paredes, I had him down as the best player moved at the deadline. I think he is by his production he's had in his career. I mean, last year 4.3 WAR. This year he's up to 3 WAR already. I love his plate discipline and his lack of strikeouts. And now his batting average on balls in play is low, and there's questions about his batted ball profile and how it will play in different ballparks. And I think that's one thing that a lot of Cubs fans, David included, have
Mhm.
been concerned about with this one. But Isak Paredes has been so good for the last couple of years with the Rays. So I really like that move. And then, of course, as David mentioned, the Cubs, they're wanting to compete next year and over the next few years. And Isak Paredes is still 25 years old, and he's not a free agent until 2028. So, he doesn't have a ton of service time built up. He's under control for a long time. This is a really good piece to bring in, in my opinion. He's a good player. It'll be interesting to see how he performs in Wrigley as
Yeah.
opposed to in Tampa. But the return for him was super interesting in Christopher Morel, and Christopher Morel is a guy who has shown stretches where he looks like he could be like the real deal. I mean, he's had games where, I mean, he's hit the ball hard. He's he's very patient at the plate. Doesn't take a lot of he takes a ton of walks. He doesn't strike out an absolute ton, considering the fact that he's got really good power. He hit 20 home runs for the Cubs this year, or I guess he hit like 18 home runs, and he hit a couple in his first week with the Rays. But um, the batting average on balls in play was really low. But this is a guy that, if he can be a little bit more consistent at the plate, he could be a guy that has a 360, 370 on base percentage while hitting for power, and that would be pretty valuable player, even though his defense is a mess. And that's one thing the Rays are pretty good at fixing. They did it with Isaac Paredes. His defense was always the question mark with him, and they found a spot for him at third base. They fixed his defense and turned him into a what by the a positive value defender, which was really good. In fact, in 2022, he's a really good defender. Um, and we'll see if they are able to do that with Morel. They also like guys that can play anywhere, and they can figure out where they best fit. And Morel's one of those guys. Like, he doesn't have a really good position, but he's played a bunch of different positions.
Yeah.
And then the prospects they got back were, David probably knows more about them, but they were, at least, like, they're not
They're
non-zero prospects. I mean,
they're raised targets.
yeah,
They're
they're not
yeah.
hopeless prospects. So
You're fine with moving. Biggie made his major league debut, but
right,
I mean, I think Neely's more of a Biggie replacement, where it's AAA guy ready for the bigs, but maybe not ready for the control. Johnson is a guy you're lucky to get value of. Like the fact that someone wanted him in a throw-in trade like this, that's a win for the drafting team.
yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like that trade a lot. I'm real interested to see how it turns out.
I like that trade a
Yeah.
lot too.
But the most interesting part to me is the Rays have immediately started playing Morel at second base.
Yeah, that's part of the problem with Morel is he needed to probably play second base or left field, and the Cubs do not have room for
Yeah.
him either of
Yeah.
those positions. He's a better fit with the Rays. Cubs fans aren't going to like it. I wish Morel nothing but the best. Great dude. He always stayed late to like sign for like kids and stuff. He was reposting. A bunch of
He's
Cubs fans were very sad.
very entertaining player too. He's
Yeah.
real flashy.
Speaking of flashy, I'll make
Yeah.
my choice here, and this is almost entirely results based. I'll be honest, but I also think it's the reaction of Jazz Chisholm getting traded to the Yankees and seeing like kind of like the old timey Yankees fans like mad because Jazz was wearing the hat, funny already, and then Jazz has come out and hit 4 homers and in the span of a week and has already got like a 194 WRC plus. He's almost equaled his offensive value from his entire time with the Marlins this past season. Like if there was one player that needed the market, he needed the energy, he needed the hunt of a playoff race, it does seem like it would be Jazz. And early returns are this is the player the Yankees needed to go out there and change the fortunes of this team. Judge and Soto needed a buddy. Jazz Chisholm is that very energetic, enigmatic buddy that is going to draw a lot of attention, whether positive or negative, away from those two superstars, and it may galvanize that team into postseason success. That's their ultimate goal. Jazz wants to get in the postseason and show off and play well. So I'm a fan of this move, but I wasn't a huge Jazz Chisholm fan in general. But the way he is already fitting in New York makes me a much bigger fan of this move. And now, as we look at it, Jazz is playing like the best player traded at the deadline.
Yeah, I mean, this was a trade that we all said that, like, hey, if this happens, like, it's going to turn out really well because not only does Jazz bring the energy and he's a type of player that New York will like because he's super flashy that way, he fits the ballpark really well.
Hmm.
Like, he plays Yankee Stadium. His swing is like tailor made for Yankee Stadium there. Um, I think the most interesting part of this is that he's immediately came in and started playing third base out of all things, and he's actually been pretty decent over there so far. Um, which another Yankee coming in, or a guy coming in wearing 13 playing third base for the Yankees. Just saying. Um, yeah, he did want to wear number 2 because he had the Jeter connection from Miami there, but that was shot down pretty quickly. But I think it's a great fit, and I think that Jazz is going to fit really well there. And it'll be interesting to see, how it develops over time because Jazz is an incredibly streaky player. How's it going to look like when he's not doing so well?
Hmm.
When how's he going to handle the media? It's not going to be anything like it was in Miami. Like, he fits when he's flashy, but what's it going to look like when he's struggling? Because Yankee fans will let you know pretty dang quick.
Yeah, I will
Um,
say one thing about that off the field stuff with him. I think that he's a lot better when he's engaged with something. Last year down the stretch when the Marlins were like legitimately in a playoff race, he was a lot better. I
yeah,
think that that's a big deal for him. I think when the team's not doing well and it's just hopeless, he just kind of loses it. So
yeah,
I think that's going to be a big time help for him going to a place where they're going to be competing every single year.
yeah, for sure. Um, so I think my favorite deadline move of all was the Zach Eflin to Baltimore. Baltimore didn't give up any prospects that they were going to have an immediate need for, um, and I think Eflin, he is a really solid pitcher. He is a number 2, number 3, right around there. He has a 4.05 ERA this year, but if you look at the peripherals, he's been a little bit better. Last year, he was really, really good under those peripherals. Um, but not only does it give them another consistent arm to go into that rotation, they were expecting to get Kyle Bradish back. They were expecting to have John Means. Both of those guys are out for the year. It gives them somebody to put right behind Corbin Burns in between him and Grayson Rodriguez. Um, and another thing that this does too is Eflin is signed through next season. So it gives them a little bit of insurance coming into the offseason with Corbin Burns being a free agent, that they have another solid, consistent arm that they can count on to go out there every day or every fifth day. Um, and I think he just fits perfectly. He's not a super flashy guy, but he gets the job done. He fits right into what they need, a 2 or 3 in that rotation, and he gives them protection for next year. And they didn't trade any prospects that are going to hurt them. It wasn't hurtful to their farm system. So I really, really like the Eflin um, trade to Baltimore. That was probably my favorite move. Um, so we'll talk about our least favorite moves real quick too. Um, I'll move real quick on this one because we talked about it a good bit on our live show or podcast last week. If you caught it, that was the Yusei Kikuchi to Houston deal. I just did not like the package they gave up. I felt like it was way too much for a rental arm and Kikuchi, who had not been very good this year. Um, and then what does he do? He goes in and has like 8 straight strikeouts or something to start his Astros career. Of course, but still, it doesn't change the fact that he was a rental arm. He did end up giving up, I think, 2 or 3 runs later on, anyways. Didn't even get through 6. I didn't love it. I think Toronto got a steal in this trade. Astros didn't do much else, but just getting Kikuchi, who I don't even think starts postseason games for them. I don't love it at all. So
Uh,
real quick and simple on that one.
yeah. And I think I said it last week, but you have to be a big fan of Joey Loperfido and Jake Bloss, I think, in order to dislike this trade. I like Bloss. I don't really like Loperfido. I thought Davison De Los Santos was the better like first base prospect that moved at the deadline here. So Loperfido might be good. He might
Yeah.
be able to hit at the major league level, but that's to be seen, and he hasn't yet. Bloss is probably a guy who can, at the very least, become a really good reliever, and at best, fit into a starting rotation. The Blue Jays definitely needed that. It is a win from the Blue Jays on that sense, but I think this trade is a little bit less of a crazy gap. Uh, and if Kikuchi fits you guys talk about the peripherals, right? I mean, Kikuchi's the kind of guy he's got a ton of strikeouts, no walks. That's a guy whose peripherals look really good right now. Can he manage the walks? Can he manage the pitch counts when he's nasty like he was in his Astros debut? If so, I think he will pitch in the playoffs for the Astros. But it's still like Damien said, it's still a little bit much for a rental starting pitcher compared especially to Jack Flaherty, whose cost was a big prospect, but a big time blocked prospect.
Yeah.
So I'll keep going, and mine is pretty straight. I liked most of the deals, and I think the Mark Leiter deal was my least favorite. But I'll go with Yimi Garcia. Matt did talk about this one already, so I'll be brief. But I like Jonathan Clase as a prospect a little more than Matt does, and Garcia's. We talked about Carlos Estevez has kind of been brought up. He went for a really big haul, but Estevez is also a really good reliever. Like Mark Leiter's a really good reliever. We saw Jason Adams is even a pretty good reliever in his own right. Tanner Scott's good. Jimmy Garcia is like the seventh, eighth, maybe ninth best reliever that moved at this deadline, and he went for a guy who has had some top 100, publications in Class A. That's a little bit much for my liking, and the Mariners end up with, I think, a big win here. Or I guess they could have maybe moved Class A for a little bit more. Would be my thought process there, and
Yeah.
Toronto gets a guy who can definitely fit into their outfield as a fourth, fifth outfielder in the coming years and be a speed guy off the bench. That's a good deal for them. So
Yeah, I guess I'll close it out here. My least favorite move at the deadline was the Giants and Braves trade that sent Jorge Soler and Luke Jackson to Atlanta for Tyler Matzik and Sabin Cabellos, who was a prospect. He's a kind of a lower end prospect, but I really just didn't think this trade made much sense for either team. I mean, the Braves badly needed outfield help. And they needed bats. The offense has really struggled. They've got all those injuries, but Solaire's a guy that's like literally the one position the Braves have had this year that has been up to the standard that they set last year has been DH, and that's what Soler is. You're not going to put Soler out there instead of Ozuna, so we're getting him to play the outfield. We hadn't played the outfield all year. He didn't play the outfield, but like 50 games last year, and he is a bad defender in the outfield. So I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. The fit doesn't make sense. Plus, you take on the money from that, which you're close to the third apron of the luxury tax already. And, he's under contract for 2 more years. Well, he's still blocked next year at the DH spot. You got Acuna coming back, who's also probably going to need to DH some. So you're going to have Ozuna and Acuna, who both are going to split the DH, and Acuna will play a lot of outfield too. So, and you've got Harris and Kellenic. So you're just in a logjam, and it's going to be tough to move that contract back in the offseason from Soler. So it feels like you're just kind of eating the money there in some ways where like I don't really think he improves the Braves. I mean, he's gonna make the offense better, but how many runs is he gonna let in? I mean, compared to what he adds, I just didn't like that very much. And then they also brought in Luke Jackson, who I love Luke Jackson. He's one of my favorite pitchers the Braves have had over the last 10 years. I just really like him. I think he's a great guy. I like his story. He got a ton of hate from Braves fans for like 3 or 4 years, and then he, you know, a lot of it was unfounded, and he turned it around and became a World Series hero. But I mean, he hasn't been very good at all after Tommy John surgery. And the thing the Braves are struggling with in the bullpen right now is that they've got nobody with options. They just had to send down one of their best relievers the other day because he was the only one that had any options, and Dylan Lee. So I mean, they added another reliever that is basically forcing them to subtract a reliever that is better than the one they got, and a DH that they're going to have to throw out in the outfield who's having a fine year, but it's not a great year. Took on a ton of money, and I hate it for the Giants too because like they need the power bat. They need a power bat, and they don't have a DH blocked. Now, they are apparently calling up Marco Luciano to DH. So if he ends up being really good, it could make sense. But you're calling up you're supposedly your buyer because you just traded for Mark Canna and you didn't trade Snell and you like so supposedly you're trying to buy, and you trade one of your better power hitters, which is a big problem for you, and don't get any return except for just that money off the books. So, I didn't understand that one very much at all for San Francisco either. This move just kind of puzzled me on both ends, and I mean, I don't, I don't get it, but I mean that's part of it. So, I guess David, if you want to get me off of my Braves rant.
Well, I guess I could posit a question that kind of came to my mind. Do the Braves consider trading Ozuna here this
I mean,
offseason? I mean, it would seem logical, but he was their best hitter this year.
yeah, they can't trade Ozuna. He's their best
Yeah.
player. I mean, this year I got and also, believe it or not, with Ozuna and his off the field problems he's had over the last, a few years ago, he's probably the most beloved member of the clubhouse. Every time somebody speaks on him in the clubhouse, they're just his glowing remarks. They absolutely love him. He's a team leader, and I don't think you trade a guy who's like a team leader who's gonna win this. Who's the best? He's the best DH not named Otani in baseball right now, and you're not. I don't think they're gonna trade him, and especially since he's not that expensive next year. He's like $15 million or something.
Maybe they just look to flip Soler.
That's
Maybe.
what I'm thinking, but we'll see.
Who knows?
So
Yeah.
it's confusing.
It's an interesting rabbit hole to go down in the off season for sure. But that's going to wrap up our basically 2024 deadline superlatives. We'll have to just we're going to start heading down to the stretch run here. We got a little bit over 2 months until the season ends. So it'll be interesting. We can start watching these races. Probably do a breakdown here soon, just resetting where everyone's at, because we haven't done one of those in a while. And then just get ready for the stretch run. But anything else you guys want to wrap up on before we head out?
I don't think so.
I have a note.
So
Okay.
Blake Snell threw a no-hitter this week.
oh yeah, we didn't talk
first-
about that.
First, did we talk about the no-hitter that hit right before too? Dylan Cease
we
threw
did
one
not.
right before the deadline. So we've had 2 no-hitters in the last week after not having one since Ronel Blanco in April.
Yeah.
So I think that was like the first weekend of the season too. So pitching starting to come around here once August hits, but especially pitching for like a guy like Blake Snell who is hoping to opt out and get a big long-term contract. That is a big moment on this season, and Snell's been very, very good here of late. He and Boris might have cooked finally, but it took him a while to get to this point. And there was no guarantee that he was going to arrive at no-hitter, 15 strikeout game in like back-to-back games.
Yeah. I mean, we talked in our chat right before the deadline that I thought he should probably be moved, and he did. But then he does that right after. So, anyways, we didn't mention those. That's a good call on your part. So, well, anyways, thank you guys for tuning in to this episode of the Bat Flip Podcast, and we'll catch you guys back here next week.